Meet Jane. She's an average woman. Like many women, Jane does not want to become pregnant. She wants access to birth control. And it frustrates her, often because religious expectations, lack of education, and lack of accessibility. Question 1. How has birth control impacted family structures and family planning through a religious lens? From early on, the Catholic Church has had a stand against birth control, believing it to be unnatural and against God's will. This has deterred many practicing Catholics from gaining access to birth control historically and experiencing its benefits. Religious systems, such as Hinduism, do not have the explicit prohibitions against family planning which characterize the Roman Catholic Church. This is significant because it shows that there were different interpretations of birth control religiously and different practices that have different beliefs. It became apparent during the 1860s and 70s that suppressing birth control information was occurring. One name that is attached to this would be Anthony Comstock, a U.S. senator who sponsored legislation that banned birth control information. Comstock was a devout Catholic and believed that it was against God's will. Due to legislations and others like it in response, nearly half the states by 1930 would ban the spread of birth control information. When the Catholic Church decided to ban birth control and others decided to support it, it showed the large split of the idea religiously and medically, and why some supported it and some did not. Question 2. How has the education of women's sexual contraceptions been restrained? Although hormone contraceptions were understood in the 1920s, it took 30 years for scientists to create preparations for oral contraception. This was due in a push from American social reformer Margaret Sanger and American biologist Catherine McCormick. The first clinical report of suppressing ovulation was in 1956, published by endocrinologist Gregory Pincus, the American gynecologist and researcher John Rock. The birth control pill was approved by the US FDA in 1960. Margaret Sanger was monumental in establishing sex education for women. She witnessed as a nurse in lower-income neighborhoods women who had undergone back alley abortions and trying to self-terminate their pregnancies. Margaret Sanger would go on to become an advocate for Planned Parenthood. Question 3. How has accessibility of women's sexual contraception varied during more recent times in America? It's no secret that women in America, especially minorities, have had a hard time getting access to basic birth control. It's no secret that these women often feel like there's no way to access these things. The Affordable Care Act that was signed in 2010 by President Obama left it so that there was no copay. This was monumental in the eyes of those who supported Planned Parenthood and birth control because accessibility would be greater to these people. The Obama administration announced that a part of the Affordable Care Act was that most insurance plans would cover birth control with no additional copay. This was met with a lot of resentment from Republican members of the U.S. government. Many conservative lawmakers began citing moral issues with increased access to birth control. Senator Blunt would go on to introduce an amendment to the Affordable Care Act that would allow any employer to deny insurance coverage for birth control, based on a so-called moral conviction. This amendment would later be voted down in Senate with a vote of 51 to 48. This vote shows how divided our country still is on the access to birth control. The Trump-Pence administration is looking to change Title IX programs. Title IX is the nation's program for affordable birth control and reproductive health. More than 4 million people rely on Title IX programs and services each year. The Trump administration issued a new call for funding applications that radically shift the program's priority. Title IX program is the only federal program dedicated to birth control access. Since the beginning of the program in 1970, it has garnered broad bipartisan support. The Title IX is to American women in their access to safe birth control methods that is effective and useful. Being one-of-a-kind program, the importance is even more crucial. The fact that this program has now had bipartisan support since the 1970s, it does not make sense why it's not being supported now. Since taking office, Donald Trump and Mike Pence have pushed policy after policy to take away basic rights in health care. Among other things, they have issued a rule to allow employers to deny birth control and coverage to their employees. My question to my peers is, can birth control be beneficial in helping climate change? Thanks for listening.